God's grandeur. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not reck his rod? Generations have trod, have trod, have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge, and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the deepest, freshest, deep down things, and though the last lights of the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with, bright wings. So this is one of Hopkins' more recognized poems. Not going to say favorites, but it's one that most people associate with Hopkins because of the beauty that is expressed in the details. We'll go through it line by line in the octave. The first line tells us that the world is charged with the energy of the electricity of God, the grandeur of God. It will flare out like if you took a piece of wrap, foil, and shook it in the sun. The shock waves of the colors and the brightness of the light would shock us. So that is what we see in the beauty of the universe. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed, like olive oil, precious oils that are flowing in the sun. And then he brings up the subject of the environment and man's position in the world to maintain this beauty. Why do men then now not reck his rod? Also, why is it that man does not see that God has this life-sustaining force all through the world, all through nature? And he says, instead, mankind has destroyed the environment. Generations have trod with their feet, and everything is dirty. Everything is covered in soot, seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now. We've deforested the land. We've, torn down beautiful acres of trees to build up, let's say, factories or parking lots and things like that. And man is now being shod. What he's suggesting here is almost like, you shoe a horse. Well, you shoe a person, and we are not grounded in the soil as we once were. It was an agrarian society in the past, and people worked the soil and were closer to the soil. But this being written around the Industrial Revolution, industrial development in the inner cities of England and Manchester and Glasgow, Scotland, and in big cities, all this is being lost. And for all this, nature, though, is never spent. This is the sestet, which is like an answer to the first part, where how man is destructive, and yet God continues to sustain the world. There lives the dearest, freshest, deepest down things in the soil. And we see this in the spring when everything comes back to life. and everything flourishes with beauty. And though the last lights of the black west went, like at night, the morning comes, eastward springs. However, notice that one word in there, the brown brink. That means like the soil and the pollution, so you can't even see the sun. It's like hazy brown instead of pink, as it might be over the ocean coming up in the morning. Oh, the morning at the brown brink, Eastwood Springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. In other words, God continues to sustain the world despite the way man has destroyed it. So at the heart of the sonnet, Hopkins speaks of the presence of God in all of nature, and despite mankind's relentless destruction of the environment, God continues to sustain and regenerate the world. The octave, like that found in a few of his other poems, it's an indictment against man for this failure to wreck his rod or take heed of God's authority as a shepherd watching over the earth, and to make God's work our own by protecting and securing the environment. The octave is pretty clear as regards to its meaning. Hopkins speaks of the presence of God in the world and illuminating concrete details such as the sudden brilliance of fire or the richness of oil being crushed slowly, gathering to a greatness. Then the role of man is described as one who is oblivious to this spectacular beauty, and in contrast is described as one with a foul smell who smears the earth with that smell. The earth is scourged by his commerce and wars, the destruction of scorched earth policy of wars. The emphasis is on generations complicit in this destruction is suggested by the words have trod, have trod, have trod, suggesting that not only has man not corrected his ways, but he has become numb to it, nor can he feel any closeness being shod now. Humans have blackened nature and have made God's presence less visible through the soot of the smokestacks or the noise of machinery, the pollution of the earth, of the rivers and the streams, the deforestation of the woodlands, and his own consumption of labor, leaving himself smeared with toil and smudge and smell, and all for profit, to get ahead with industrial development. So in the octave, the speaker recognizes that God is ever present in nature as a charge running through it and is accessible to those who look deep down into everything in the world. Humans can interact with God through his creation. The problem is that man has replaced this means of connecting with God by his smudge and smear, and has made God less accessible because of other interests such as progress or commerce. So this concept of man and nature being in contention with each other is something you find throughout a lot of poetry. One poem comes to my mind by Sarah Teasdale, in which she talks about wars and the destruction of generations, like the World War One. A whole generation was wiped out. But she goes beyond that. In her poem, there will come, there will come soft rains is the title of the poem. And she speaks about the last war, the nuclear war. And this is the way it goes. There will come soft rains, and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with the shimmering sounds, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous light. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low-fenced wire, and not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done, not one would mind nor neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. So in that poem, there's no sense of hope at the end, whereas in this poem by Hopkins, we have the Holy Ghost um, wrapping its arms around the world and all who are living within it. So God continues to sustain the world. Um, and it says, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. So like a brooding hen sitting over its little chickens. So also we have that image here. So the sestet in God's grandeur suggests a maternal protection. We have the natural cycles of birth and death as well as rebirth as suggested by the allusion to sunrise and sunset and the imagery found in the brooding Holy Ghost, enclosing the world within its wings, giving confidence to the regeneration of the world despite man's destruction. Three images support this idea. The word yet, nature is never spent, there lives the dearest freshness. In the morning eastward springs, and the Holy Ghost enwrapping the world within its wings, all convey the idea that God continues to shower his love upon mankind, despite man's insensitivity to its destruction of nature. The images in the sestet complement the idea stated in the opening line of the octave that the world is charged with the grandeur of the electrical force that animates or powers all of nature. A secondary meaning can be found in the opening line if one considers that another meaning for the word charged is that the people who inhabit it are charged. In other words, we are given the charge, we are given the task of sustaining or maintaining what we have that God has given us. Hence, one can suggest that the world has a responsibility or a duty to recognize the magnificence of God. Line 4, why do men not reck his rod, then implies that mankind has failed in that responsibility. The sonnet form is one of Hopkins' favorite choices in presenting his arguments. In this poem, the contrast between man's destruction of the environment and the life-sustaining force as seen in the grandeur of God is clearly demonstrated by the structure of the octave and the sestet. The first four words of the sestet, and for all this, refers to the indictment as described in the octave. In other words, despite everything described above in the octave, God remains faithful to his people. One final note about Hopkins' use of the Petrarchan sonnet, which is an Italian sonnet, is if we look closely at the rhyming scheme, the Petrarchan, as opposed to Shakespeare's sonnet, has a rhyming scheme of A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, C, D, whereas Shakespeare's is A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G. And so what? Well, think about it. In an Italian sonnet, you have to make 4 words rhyme instead of just 2. And another point is that the Petrarchan sonnet, most were written in Italian, and most Italian words end in vowels. So it would be easier for an Italian poet to come up with a rhyming scheme than someone writing in English, as Hopkins did. He was a very English person anyway, and that places a bigger burden on him to come up with 8 words that rhyme instead of 2 in each sestet, and in each couplet rather. So just to give you an idea of the craftsmanship that goes into his work beyond the analysis of his beautiful presentation of an argument of how we are charged with the the responsibility of sustaining the world, and yet we don't